everybody, this is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. This week we have a guest coming to us from New Zealand. His name is Dick Wybrow. He's actually originally a Canadian, but he grew up in the US and now lives there. He was also a former major market rock jock, a stand-up comedian, and a CNN producer. He's now writing best-selling humorous supernatural novels. Seriously, Google him. They're hilarious. And he also has narcolepsy, which these days he sees it as his superpower. So he is definitely someone I am dying to interview, as I have attempted to do or done many of these things. And I'm also never attempted to do stand-up comedy, but it's my favorite thing by far on earth. So we'll see where this interview meanders. But for now, Dick, how's it going?
Good, man. It is. We're right in the thick of winter here, and I know that's different for people in North America, but it's chilly and it's rainy and it's but still lovely. It's New Zealand, so I can't complain.
Yeah, and we normally ask our guests right off the bat, how old are you, where did you grow up, and what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of? You can skip the part unless you want to specify which part of Canada, which would definitely be of interest. So.
I was born in Winnipeg, raised all across the United States, in I think 9 different states. And when I did radio, moved around a lot. I was in Georgia, SoCal, Missouri, all over the place, Florida. We moved here about 10 years ago to New Zealand because my father was Kiwi. I'm half New Zealander. I'm 55 years old, and I am part of the Pepsi generation, if that's a thing.
Yeah, no, I love it. That's awesome. A lot of questions I have, just even from that. I think my first one would be, like, where did you graduate from high school? Because that's usually kind of like a pinpoint for, like, what you do next.
I graduated from Edina, Minnesota High School, EHS, wow. and there were two different factions. So Edina was a really big community, still is a huge community, and so there was Edina West and there was Edina East. Edina West, those were all the really wealthy folks, people that like owned Daytons and stuff like that, and then we came from the Edina East, and so we were known as the sandwich eaters, and they were the cake eaters. It was like something from a Friday Night Lights or something. So it's not like we were broke poor, yeah. But compared to them, compared to the Edina, the Westies, the cake eaters, everybody was poor. So, there were Porsches and there were just all in the parking lot. There were just beautiful cars. And so when I ended up getting a car my senior year, it was a 1976 Trans Am. And it just growled into the parking lot. You could see like oil leaking out of all the other really high dollar cars around it. So you do what you can when you can. But yeah, Minnesota has, in fact, a good number of my books take place in Minnesota because I do love it.
Cool. Yeah. And I figured, if you've danced around Earth as much as you have, it's just, I got to pin you to something to ask some of these questions. However, with that said, I was also just interested in the mentality as you graduated. Were you like one of those guys you were like, I'm going to become a stand-up comedian, I'm also going to work on radio, I'm also going to do television production, or did you have like one focus at the time and then you just branched out a ton?
No, writing was always a thing for me, but no, like anybody sort of graduating from high school, it's like I sort of have a plan, but I don't have a plan. When I'm really honest with myself, I have no plan whatsoever. But writing was always that thing, and I actually got into stand-up. It was one of my first jobs, which is madness. Why would you do that to yourself?
Seriously.
But that made sense to me at the time because what I was doing is I was writing short stories and things like that and sending them out. And I was getting a lot of, rejections because that's what happens. And so somewhere in my messed up head, I went, if I write something and get on stage, that is a version of being published. So that's what I did. And so I would write sort of, jokes, little stories and things like that and get up on stage. And I did that for a good couple of years because I was convinced to some extent, because I love, like you, I love stand-up comedy. I grew up with stand-up comedy. I had memorized entire stand-up comedy albums, but never necessarily had a great desire to be in the spotlight. The stand-up comedy was a way for me to get published, and it made sense to me at the time.
That makes so much sense to me. Yeah, because I've been a musician. I'm a writer throughout my life, and I only realized that when I was much older. I was like, oh, you like writing music. You like writing these things. Like even though you're doing, and performance is definitely not my thing. It's not even that I'm bad at it. I'm not saying I'm great, but I just don't get elated from it, and it's not worth it if you're going to be waiting till 10 to get on a stage and all that,
That's why I stopped. To be honest, that's why I made the transition from radio, rather from stand-up comedy into radio, because I would get up on stage, and after you do it for a couple of years, it's like anything. The first time I got up and did stand-up, I did 5 minutes, which is an eternity.
Mm.
And
Wow.
of all of that, I think about 12 seconds worked.
I love it.
So I had to grow it from that 12 seconds or so. But there became a moment where I had a good 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes, a solid set, and I knew I'd get laughs every time. And in the middle of one of my acts, I was sitting there, and I realized I'm not even here right now. I'm actually sort of going over in my head, oh, afterwards when I'm done, I got to stop by the store and pick up this. And I got woken up by laughter. I was like, oh, shoot. What? And I just realized how disconnected I was from it. And so that's at that point I knew I was kind of done with stand-up comedy, moved into radio.
That's awesome. And it's actually interesting because this is a metaphysical podcast, but we interview anyone who's interesting. That's actually more important to me than like, do you qualify for a metaphysical, philosophical conversation about death? But what you just said really is like metaphysical to me, which is that your consciousness can be split. Like you can be an automaton speaking and doing things, and yet you're kind of experiencing that. So I'm curious, have you had any like supernatural experiences in your life? Are there any things that come to mind like that?
I think when it comes to supernatural experiences, I guess you have to allow yourself to at least be open to the idea that there are supernatural experiences.
Oh yeah,
because there's a habit to explain everything away, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if I'm sitting in the room and my cat looks off in the corner, it's like, oh, what's he fussing with? But maybe the cat's looking at a ghost.
Yeah, totally.
Maybe the cat sees something I'm not seeing. But no, I mean, when it comes down to any of that, especially now I'm getting older now, I've actually gone maybe the reverse direction of a lot of people. I've become more spiritual as I've gotten older, even religious, even the last year or so. In sort of looking back and reflecting on how many times that some unseen force has saved my butt along the way. When I was near homeless in Los Angeles, or when I got myself fired out of a radio job and had a family of 5. Oof. Yet all along the way, there were just moments where just when I looked like I was up at the precipice, that I got pulled back. And so I guess in a broader sense, and maybe less fun in that way, but mm-hmm. I've started to see more and more that I'm being taken care of, which has been actually really a nice thing to start to embrace. I don't know what that looks like, but I do feel more at peace with that.
That's such a cool answer, and I really appreciate that. I'm turning 43 this month, and like I love aging, and I always have, but I actually was kind of lamenting today how much of like a soft emotional person I'm becoming, just because it's so foreign to me, coming from like the same shoot that you shot out of, which is just like being a guy in like the 80s and 90s and just kind of how we expected society to unfold. And then now I find myself like truly caring about other people in like a actually selfless way. And it's not self-aggrandizing, and it doesn't do anything for me. So it's just kind of funny. And what you said really hit home for me. Especially the part about like, it just kind of all works out. Like I was hit by a car and I was in a wheelchair. I had this happen, I had that happen, but like it somehow centers. And I've also found, and I'm curious, this is my next question for you. Do you feel like the less you try, the more it works out, or is that actually not true for you?
When I start to reflect back and I take a look at all my plans, because I am one of these sort of, I wouldn't say control freak, but I really like having my hands on the wheel.
Yeah.
And when I reflect back, and this is part of, I guess, bit of my spiritual journey. I'm not a huge fan of that phrase, but I mean, mm-hmm. when I take a look back and I say like, here was my plan to do this, even coming to this country, even coming to New Zealand, my plan was, when I first came, there was a television show, because I was a TV producer at the time. There was a television show that was really interested, and they wanted me to come in and produce for them. And I showed up in country, and I'd moved everything, me and my wife and all of our stuff. And we came here, and I got ghosted. So here I am in a new country, and I got ghosted. And you fast forward that 1 year, and given my background, you take a look at what happened was I ended up being the 2IC, which is second in command, mm-hmm. The 2IC of a live comedy news show. Now, I never planned on doing that. And if I would have said, like, given my background, because as you had said, I worked at CNN for some years. Mm-hmm. I did stand-up comedy, that sort of thing, and radio, which was a lot of comedy. If I could have prescribed a perfect role, I guess it would be working on a comedy news show.
Yeah.
I hadn't sought that out. That hadn't existed. But when things sort of went pear-shaped, as I like to say here, that opportunity presented itself. So it's not the sort of thing where you can just sit back and go, here, I'm just waiting for these gifts to come in. I had to pursue and chase around and work really hard. But as I did, the designs I had and the direction I was going, that wasn't where I ended up. I ended up on something else. And in this case, it was pretty perfect for me for 7 years.
That's awesome. And that totally makes sense to me. Kind of circling back because we skipped over, I didn't ask, not we, about your radio career. I'm also a huge fan of radio. It's kind of hard to explain because like I wasn't into the morning zoo when it was like out. I was like young, and then Howard Stern was kind of peaking when I was turning like 13, 14, and I got really into that kind of radio and stuff. So I'm curious, like, were you coming up, or were you on the air competing against like Imus and Stern and all those people, or were you in like a different bracket genre?
No, I was competing against a crew out of LA called Kevin and Bean.
Oh God, yeah,
at
of
the
course
time.
I know them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was a little bit outside of the LA area, but no, they were my main competition.
Mhm.
And it's funny when people think about radio, you know, it's a little bit like podcasting, and I think people don't realize how much goes into just talking, because it isn't just talking. It's understanding the flow of a conversation. It's sort of creating, you know, a listener along with the performer. There's so many little nuances to something to make something work, and understanding, you know, how to keep entertaining and bringing people back again and again. And so, yeah, that was the challenge of radio to a great extent, was just making it look like just carefree and fun for those couple of hours you're on the air, but all the work it took to get there. You know, all the years it took, but also the concentration. Like, you know, if we're talking to this particular guest, how do we make it actually interesting or so much more fun? And it's a real art. And so I loved the heyday of radio because I came up in the late 90s and the early 2000s, and that started about 94. And there were some amazing days in radio. It was so much fun. And I used to hear stories about the old 80s sort of guys in the 80s. And those guys were next level, man. That was a whole different bunch of folks. So yeah, no, it was fun. It was a great time.
That's really cool. Yeah, no, and it's interesting. I mean, I'm just so thankful for podcasts coming out because I just love listening to people talk, and I enjoy like everything about what radio is about. And also as a kid, I just like my parents let me have an alarm clock in my room with a radio. You know, what else was I going to do? And it's cool that there's this new iteration of it.
I think it's the connection. I think I loved the connection. I mean, one moment that really sticks out, and it was a real small moment.
Mhm.
I was in Pensacola, Florida. I was working at a 100,000 watt radio station and blasted all across the Gulf Coast. I was doing mornings, and I was known as a bit of a sarcastic, sort of funny kind of character, not really approachable. But then one day I get a knock on my door. And this guy, the listener, comes up to my door, and he says, "Hey, Dick, we're not, you know, I know I shouldn't be here right now. We all know where you live, and well, sort of nobody bothers you." And I was like, "What in the world does that even mean?" But he goes, "Here's the thing." He said, "I don't know where to turn," and that's when I smelled the alcohol in his breath. I'm like, "Okay, this is scary because I got people at home."
Yeah.
And he goes, "I lost all my tools. I was driving down the road and I had the tools in the back of my truck and they fell out on Pensacola Highway." He said, "If there's anything you could do, that would be great." I'm like, "What are you great? Thank you. I appreciate it." Close the door. Randomly the next day, so our show went from 6 to 10. At 9 o'clock, usually we coasted through the 9 o'clock hour, played a lot of music. And I just, for the heck of it, I was like, "Hey, listen, there's a guy who I met last night, and his tools fell out on Pensacola Highway. So if you've seen him, keep an eye out for him. But more specifically, this is somebody who his family depends on this. This is his work. This isn't just free tools for you to pick up and sell somewhere, make a couple bucks. This is a guy trying to, you know." And I just kind of told a bit of his story. And then within 10 minutes, I get a call. The guy goes, So this random caller, it felt like, he was like, "I was really hoping to keep those tools. They were really nice." But he said, the guy goes, yeah, I found them. I found them up on the road. So I hooked these two folks together, and they showed up at the radio station. I just sort of watched from a distance. And these two grown men, these two sort of burly kind of guys, and they hugged at the end of it. And one guy had tears in his eyes. And that's what I loved about radio. And that's what I love about podcasts, too, is that opportunity for connection. You know, that opportunity to potentially do one small thing for somebody, to have one small bit of effect. And for me, I was ashamed of it, about how I sort of blew off that moment. Even though I sort of sold it, I didn't realize how significant that was at the time. And so I've tried to be more present with those sort of moments when somebody or something comes up in my life and think this might be an opportunity that I can help somebody out, that I will remember for the next 30 years as I do that moment in Pensacola.
That's really cool. And that's really special. And it actually nicely segues into the other part of your career that I wanted to ask about. And I thought a lot about how to frame this question because when I say the letter CNN to an audience of mostly Americans in the year 2024, it's not just like polarizing. It's like a word that means more than two coordinates-izing because like everyone and their mother has an opinion about that network now. So first of all, before I ask you some of the questions, I just want to make sure that you're actually at liberty to speak about your time there because I don't want to like pressure you if that's an issue.
Yeah, it's totally okay. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, what years did you work for CNN and produce for them?
It would have been 2001 or no, 2002 to about 2013. I think it was about a decade in there. Yeah.
Wow. So you were there actually for like the end of its peak, I would say, of popularity. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, when we would speak to some of the folks who've been there for quite some time, they'd tell us amazing stories back in the day when people should actually spend money on news. But yeah, no, I was there for some of the heyday.
Cool. So I think my first question would just be for those of us, I shouldn't say us because I'm not in this group, but for people who are news junkies and like love the news, do you have any sort of like insider thing that would help them in this era where people seem to be feeling hostility towards the news? Because I'm looking, to broker peace here.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I will say about the news is for the most part, everybody I met was just trying to do good. I mean, sincerely. And I have, like I said, I don't have any dog in this hunt anymore, so I can say that with all sincerity. Here in New Zealand, we just lost half of our news services. TV3 had News Hub and all these other shows. We've lost half of that. And then TVNZ is reducing its news load. And I know a lot of people celebrate that. And I'm not a big fan of the news, to be honest. I know a lot of people celebrate that, but we really do need people in the news to be chasing stuff down. Mm-hmm. The big question I get all the time is, oh, you guys had an agenda. You guys had this. And hand on heart, there was never at any point did anybody from above say, you have to talk about this or you have to take this particular angle. But I will say that there were plenty of people within the producer pool that had their own agendas, either unspoken or otherwise. And so they wanted to get that person, whatever it might be. They wouldn't necessarily say that sort of thing out loud. And there was never any really dictate to people saying, oh, this is exactly how we have to do this because we're trying to scuttle this person. So news is extremely important. And it's definitely going away. I mean, there's no question it's going away. It's falling to the wayside. And if you want to be a conspiracy person, this is the greatest thing possible for people in power. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a conspiracy person, but we definitely need people there that can go and find those stories. It gets clouded these days because when people complain and say, oh, the news is crap, or it only talks about, film stars or TV stars or whatever, it's like, well, that's the stuff that people click on. Unfortunately, news, especially like in the US and here, is still a commercial entity. I mean, that's the hard part. It's still entertainment, for lack of a better expression. Mm-hmm. It's got to make money. So we know in news that if this is something that you will pay attention to, for the longest time, obviously climate change is really important to talk about, but nobody wanted to hear about it. That's why you didn't see it in the news, because I talk about a climate change story, you're tuning away, you're turning off. I can't have that. I can't have you, for as important as that is, I can't have you turn that off. And so that's why you see all the headlines that are terrible and annoying. Some guy, that goofy story recently where some guy was driving and he didn't have a license, but he was talking with a judge and he was in the car. And then it turns out, no, he really did have a license. And then there was another story. No, he really didn't. And that dominated headlines for a couple of days. You look and go like, how does this even matter? And it matters because that's what you're clicking on. And so that's what dictates what gets covered. And the last thing I guess I will say about television is it's filled with just awful people. with horror. I had things said to me as an adult that I never had the worst person in my life say to me as a child. I mean, just
Wow.
questioning why I'm even on this planet. I
Wow.
mean, oh my God. It was just TV is radio had a bit of this, and I know the music industry has it too, but some of the most awful people in the world. And I don't know if they came in awful or if just the industry infects them. I'm not sure, but horrible, many horrible people in the industry for sure.
I wanted to just throw a cool compliment your way. You're funny, but I don't actually think it's that hard for people to be funny. But you're funny in a very clever way where like the twists and turns and the bends are unforeseen. And I really appreciate your humor because that, I mean, you
Okay.
just got me rolling laughing. Yeah, I am, to say I'm disenchanted with the news would be like the nicest way to put it. But, I was really into like civics in the end of high school and heading into college. And then, like I said, George Bush was elected when I was like 18, and it wasn't. I didn't vote for Gore either. I just got turned off, and then 9/11 happened shortly after that, and I started to see holes that you're talking about. But what terrifies me is the thing you said about you're not a conspiracy theorist, but it's nevertheless true, which is that if you're in power, you definitely either want like one news channel that you control, or no news, or no competition.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I see things going that way. So do you you can't prophesy anything. I mean, I know that, but like, do you foresee a dark era ahead and then hopefully something will lift us out of that? Or do you think we're going to kind of muddle through? Like, how did you just kind of see things? Because you're still young. I mean, you still have a lot of living left to do. So you're going to have to deal with this problem too.
I have faith in humankind. I really do. And it's funny because right now we're taking a look at the economy doesn't look really good, and younger people are like, "Oh, this is the worst." We take a look at climate change, or we take a look at the various wars around. It's like I'm 55, and I've had at least a half dozen moments in my life where it was the worst, and will never get better. And I know everybody feels this is the time when the tipping point, but I get a little bit like this too shall pass. And I do believe that because I've seen it again and again. We were hiding under our desks in the 1980s because we were convinced that we were going to get
Yeah,
bombed,
yeah.
but by the Soviet Union, and it didn't get any worse than that. So, yeah, and then obviously after 9/11, which was an amazingly awful, 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 and that was the worst I'd ever felt,
Hmm.
and then things got better. So even right now, it's, you take a look and things will get better. I just think we're becoming more cognizant. We're becoming more aware about what happens behind the scenes. I think that is becoming more and more obvious. I remember being at CNN many years ago, and there were a couple of politicians, far left, far right, and they were on a show. And we used to, so at CNN, you have routers. So
Mm.
these are camera feeds coming from all these different places. And at the time, I was just listening into one of the routers. And these two guys on the air were just going at each other. And I mean, you just knew that if they were in the same room, one would just jab the other in the neck with a pencil. Now, this was on Lou Dobbs, way back in the
Oh,
day.
wow. Yeah, yeah.
When,
Okay.
when the show ended, it was insane to listen to. The moment that the mics were off and they went to commercial, one guy says to the other, "Hey, you gonna be stopping to buy that thing a little bit later on?" "Oh, no, Larry mentioned that to me, but I don't think I can." "Oh, is Jan gonna be there?" "Yeah, tell her I said hey." "Okay, yeah, I definitely will, man." And yeah, I saw that thing you did. It's like, wait a minute, what in what was
Wow.
this? These guys hate each other, but as soon as the mics went off, they were just, this is part of the puppet show. And I think that as we start to realize that, for all the bluster and noise and everything, they have to make a lot of bluster and noise get headlines. They've got to appeal to the people who put them in office. But in the end, a lot of it is a bit of a puppet show. And I think more and more as we start to realize that all the noise and all the finger pointing and that a lot of that is just noise, that maybe we'll be fine. We'll be fine in the end. It'll be fine.
It's really interesting, and it definitely gels and with how I feel and what I'm thinking, and it's definitely optimistic for me to hear that, or it helps me be optimistic. And I do agree, like my faith in humanity has never wavered more than 9/11, but it also wavered. I didn't lose it, so I agree.
Yeah.
As dark as things could seem.
Yeah.
One last comment about the media, or one last question rather, because you mentioned it, it occurred to me, it reoccurred. The only time I've ever seen like a piercing of the veil of what you call like the puppet show, which is the news,
Yeah.
was when Epstein died and people started saying Epstein didn't kill himself, and then anchors would get like this nervous look, and that one ABC person got fired. as someone who was an insider but had then become an outsider, one, was that interesting to you, or two, was that also like fabricated? Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to Coffin Talk. I am proud to say that we are offering premium subscriptions at my website, mikeyop.com. That's MIKEYOPP.com. So please head over and consider supporting us. Thank you so much.
No, I think there's this thought that when it comes to anchors and producers and all that, that there's this sort of this pipeline that goes through, and everybody's supposed to take this line. You know what I mean? Like some cabal is laying out what needs to be said. I think they're just sort of reacting, and a lot of times they're worried about their own jobs or what might be able to be said. Mm-hmm. And there's plenty of times that, depending how, like, I'll give COVID as an example. Mm-hmm. Because I'm really agnostic when it comes to news. I really mean that. Mm-hmm. I'm not Republican. I'm not Democrat. I just don't have within me I don't want to say to care that much, but I just don't have any affiliation. I really don't. Mm-hmm. And so there was a time when here just a couple of years ago, there was a story about some cops, two police officers, married couple, that didn't want to take the didn't want to take the vaccine, the jab, as we mm-hmm. call it here. And I remember saying to my boss, saying at the time, hey, listen, we should get them on this interesting story. And they were like, yeah, but the scary part is if we bring them on, then that might make people not want to take the jab. Mm. And so it wasn't like, and so there was nothing negative about that, because at the time everybody was supposed to take it because this was going to save humanity. Mm-hmm. But it was like, that's still a story. And so, and again, I want to make it clear that there wasn't any sort of like, let's convince people of this or let's not convince people of something else, whatever it might be. But there was a feeling from a good place in their heart saying, we think this is the best thing. And it took me a long time to get that couple on the air. And we eventually did. And it was a great conversation. But there was a fear that if we did this, it would go against the best thing that would be for humanity. And I guess that's maybe sometimes the problem. Is you do have on occasion people within these news organizations that are sort of deciding, which I suppose they should, but are sort of deciding what's best for people to hear.
Yeah, wow, that's really interesting. That makes so much sense to me, because I think there's a lot of that with the January 6th events when Trump was, supposedly / leaving office, because like a failure to report it, but also over-reporting it or reporting it a certain way. That's just really interesting. So, wow, you've really helped me understand something today. Right. That's a really cool, mature way to look at it that actually feels like the right way to look at it. And I was having trouble recently, so I'm also agnostic about the same things. Yeah. But I'm not agnostic about caring, so.
No, yeah.
That's cool. Let's move back to the metaphysics to end the show. I want to ask the standard question of the podcast, and then we'll go from there. But what do you think happens when you die?
I thought about this a bit, and I'm a big believer. I've got a little of the spirituality, as I mentioned, more and more, but also I'm a big believer in quantum mechanics. So I think that as you die, there's this thing called the observer effect, right? Mm-hmm. Where as you observe something, especially on the subatomic level, that it can affect the outcome. So I think your mindset going in as you die could affect where you go. So I'm starting to believe this more and more, that maybe I just got to get something into my head that as I'm starting to shuffle off and die, that I'll have a really positive outtake, or I would, because it could, who knows? None of us know. So maybe it's just the mindset you have as you die, like the observer effect in quantum mechanics, might affect where you go. And so I've decided that I want to be a ghost.
That's awesome.
If I've got a choice, I want to be a ghost. And so I'm going to focus on that so that I could, because being a ghost would be great. You get a chance to be a ghost. You could still watch movies. You could see TV shows. And then, I could keep an eye on all my relatives, all the people I care about. And if anybody messes with them, I can haunt the hell out of them.
I love it. Wow, that's cool.
So I'm going with Ghost. But I think there might be something to that. There might be something to that observer effect, that maybe it's your mindset going into it.
I mean, I'm no scientist, but I do read books about quantum mechanics with like a furious interest that is never satiated. And I would definitely say that's not only possible, but actually quite likely based on some of the things I've read.
Yeah, why not?
It's also I think you're guest 180, and I've never heard that answer, so that's also really cool because I love when I hear something unique. And then, sort of with that, you're a writer, I'm a writer. I'm curious what your thoughts are about flow state, particularly tying it into the subject of like spirituality and all that.
Oh, I write that way. I mean, it's funny. It's for the longest time I didn't even quite understand, because a lot of people, I know there's a lot of people that are plotters when it comes to writing, and I'm not. I'm somebody who just writes. I let the characters speak through me, and I know for somebody who's not a writer, that sounds really flaky. But that is sort of my flow state, where characters sort of dictate where the story goes, and I just sort of transcribe at that point. I'm not literally hearing their voices, but there are moments where, like Kane, my main character, he's a werewolf, but he's also a 6'7" French Canadian who used to be a wolf. Kind of confusing, but he's only been a human for about a year or so ago, because he got bitten by a man, and then he was a wolf, got bit by a man that turned into a human that sometimes turns into a werewolf, and occasionally dogs. But so he's only been a human for about a year, and so his observation of humankind is fascinating to me. The way the stuff that he picks out about things that humans do that are a bit strange, or the stuff that confuses him. And there were moments when I'm writing that I laugh out loud. It's something he says, and I know that sounds like, oh, you're just laughing at your own jokes. It's like, no. That's not something I wrote. I didn't sit down and craft that joke out. It was just sort of this thing that popped into my head that made me laugh. I put it down on a page. So yeah, no, it took a while to really give myself up to that flow state, because for a while I want to put governors on it, and for a while I said, no, I can't go there, I can't do this. But now I just let it flow, and I do adjust stuff in editing to make sure that it makes sense to people, that it's true to the story. But I'll be honest, there's nothing more beautiful and fulfilling than when that starts to flow through you. That is as close as I've come to touching the face of God. It's an amazing feeling when that starts to flow through you.
I could not phrase it better myself. That's 100% my experience. I just finished my 8th novel, and it's just like the only reason I do it is for those inside jokes between you and whatever the heck that source is. I mean, that was just a fantastic answer. So I'm curious how you would explain rejection.
First, I guess my first answer to that would be, I'm going to sound like your mother, but and this is from a lot of experience, most rejection isn't about you. Most rejection that comes from other people is about them. And so I don't let the people who are being negative toward me affect my mind, but also they're engaging with me. And in 2024, that engagement is everything, even if it's negative. There's a guy, another author, who talks about getting people that say bad things about his books on like Amazon reviews or something. And he said he loves it. He said, because somebody might say, oh, this whole thing is goofy, and there's jokes where it should be serious and this sort of thing. And so his mindset is like, yeah, but you know what? Somebody might read that and go, well, I actually kind of like that. So even when somebody's complaining about something you're doing, somebody might read that complaint and go, well, that thing he's complaining about is something I like. And so I see all the negativity or any sort of the critics that come in. I take it all, and it's like I see them as a positive. I really do.
That's so cool. Yeah, you're a complicated, clever man, but with very simple approach to elocution, and I love it. It's like it's cool, and I hope that as I wisen, I will be able to take the same approach, because you're just very good at taking complicated things and deconstructing them, but not oversimplifying them as well. So with that in mind, I just put a ton of pressure on you. You have the floor. You can end the show. I'll obviously say something after you finish, but what would you like to tell our audience? It can be about anything you want.
I'll mention this since I guess maybe some people clicked into this as a writer. So as a writer, when you're writing something, don't worry about what you're writing. Write something you like. I wrote something years ago, some 20 years ago, that got picked up by Hollywood. And I was convinced at the time that I had made it. But I hadn't written really what was from my heart. I had written something to market, as they say. And that screwed me up for years. Because I was convinced, see, look, I had orchestrated and worked it out. I write this thriller. And then Hollywood came and said, yeah, we want to turn that into a movie or a TV series. And so for years I was convinced. And it was my wife who said, don't do any of that. Just write what you want to write. And my thought at the time was like, but what I want to write is nuts. The stuff that I want to write is crazy. And my latest series, as I said, and I'm not just trying to plug the series, give you an example. So I wrote I wrote a thriller at the time about a fire investigator investigating what ended up being the attempted assassination of the vice president. And so what I just wrote in the last year is about a man biting a wolf, that wolf turning into a human, that human being a 6'7" French Canadian, when the full moon comes out, turns into a werewolf. When lesser moon phases come out, he turns into lesser wolves, which are dogs. And the entire story is about him trying to get back to his pack. That's insane. That's nuts. But that's what I wanted to write. And it's blown up huge. And so I only sort of, in a roundabout way, say, write what's in your heart. Just write what you want to do. It might not go big. It might not explode or whatever it might be. But just write what's in your heart. And it just feels great. Like, Mike, you were talking about the flow state. When you really write what's from inside of you, that flow state comes through you. And even if I just got that as my gift, that flow state and that amazing feeling of that creation, then that would have been enough. And don't worry about the first draft. First drafts are always terrible. So if you're listening to this because you saw a writer in there and you want to hear something about writing, write that first draft and know it's gonna suck. Because I've just written the first draft of my 5th book and it's not good. But it'll get better. And I've been having a blast doing it the entire time. And I hope that helps.
That is so helpful. That is so awesome. You are helpful and you are awesome. Dick, I'm so glad that we connected. There's this site out there, everyone, I always mention it. It's called Podmatch. And boy, have there been some duds, but there are so many rewards on it. And one of them is our guest today, Dick Wybrow, everyone. There will be plenty of notes for how to find him and especially his books. Please go out and support him. As you could tell by how funny he was talking, imagine what he's like when he's able to edit all of that interesting dialogue in his head. So thank you again, Dick. And to everyone else at home, as always, the best way to support the show is to head over to mikeyop.com. That's MIKEYOPP.com and sign up for the once a week free letter that comes along with the podcast. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Dick. My name is Mike Oppenheim. You have been listening to Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon.